Thank you. Good to be back. You know, Mike, thank you again, and Matt Moon. I kind of sprung this on them last minute. We weren't sure that we were going to be able to attend, and it would have been one of the first ones I'd missed in about 12 years. I've been involved in some form or fashion, either covering this or participating and promoting the event, I think since 2000. So it goes back a long way. So I love Judd Hill Field Day. It's always a lot of fun and very informative. And, you know, you talk about the spirit of cooperation between the University of Arkansas and Arkansas State University. I want to give you an example of that cooperation that happens really every day, and then another example that I share with Dr. Cochran. Of course, you know our two senators are both University of Arkansas graduates, and I had the opportunity to travel with them to Panama just a few weeks back, Panama and Colombia, and we were talking to folks down there about the new free trade agreements that were passed last year and what the potential is for Arkansas with respect to particularly agriculture, but certainly bolstering our trade opportunities in those two countries. We had the opportunity to have lunch with the president of Panama, who himself is a University of Arkansas graduate. So no coincidence, they sat the senators on either side of the president at this great big table in the presidential palace, and they sat me on the other side of the table. And there's a theme here, you know. These guys are all talking about Fayetteville and everything's, you know, strolling down memory lane. So I'm sitting next to the ambassador and next to the Secretary of Agriculture, or their ag minister, as he's called there in Panama, and he doesn't speak English. So I'm dying to talk to him. Of course, I don't speak Spanish. Lo and behold, University of Arkansas steps in. Dr. Cochran, who is 35 years fluent in Spanish, stepped in, and he was my translator. So I got to engage with the Minister of Agriculture in Panama, courtesy of the University of Arkansas, while they were engaging with the President of Panama, reliving the glory days of Razorback football. So I was the Red Wolf at the table, and I don't mind being the Red Wolf at the table. I'm proud of Arkansas State University, and Dr. Welch, thank you for all you've done, and it's just come a long way. We're excited about Gus Malzahn. But I didn't come here to talk about that. I came to talk to you about the Farm Bill, because surely nobody in here cares anything about the Farm Bill. Before we get into that, I want to talk about some of the things that are going right in Washington, and they're not very many, but there is one in particular that I want to point out. And many of you already know about it. We've had some success, and when we have those successes, however small they may be, we want to talk about that and share that with you. And going back well over a year, we were starting to hear from farmers about some of the problems that they were having with on-farm fuel storage and some of the rule implementation that the EPA was really breathing down hard on. And I wrote a letter to Lisa Jackson, the EPA administrator. We had over 100 members of Congress sign the letter requesting that they reevaluate those standards. 1,320 gallons of on-farm fuel storage, in my opinion, probably yours, is not a realistic standard before you were required to build that spill prevention and containment countermeasure, which can cost upwards of $10,000 just in engineering, and depending on how many gallons you've got to contain, it could go up considerably from there. So we were successful in getting the rule delayed. They were going to implement the rule in November of 2011. We found out in the latter part of October they were going to delay implementation of the rule till May of 2013. Now that's a fine reprieve, but it's nothing more than a reprieve from my perspective. So we started to craft a bill that we felt better reflected the needs and the standards of real-world agriculture, particularly here in the Mid-South. And so what our bill says, basically, is that you would not be required to build that spill prevention and containment countermeasure until you reach the threshold of 10,000 gallons on the farm. And that's not a random number. That's a number that the EPA themselves had adopted in 2006 as a provision of the underlying law, the 1973 Clean Water Act. So we didn't just grab that number out of thin air. That was their definition, that was their number and their standard for a small farm. So we used that as the benchmark before you would have to build that spill prevention and containment countermeasure. Then we took it another step further, and we said between 10,000 and 42,000 would be the requirement to build the structure, but you could self-certify. And then beyond 42,000 gallons would require the third-party PE and certification. Now, we spent a long time writing this bill because we wanted to get it right. And the University of Arkansas studied this bill, and they said that it would save Arkansas farmers alone $240 million in compliance costs. That it would save farmers around the country $3.36 billion in compliance costs. Now, I don't know about you, but from where I'm standing, I think you can do a heck of a lot more for our economy with that $3.36 billion than the cash flow unnecessary regulatory costs. And so we are excited that we got that bill through the House. It came up through transportation. I also serve on that committee. Even though it's an ag issue, it comes under the purview of transportation. It came out of Transportation Committee without a single dissenting vote. Passed on a voice vote, went to the floor within 2 days. We were able to take that onto the floor under the suspension of the rules, which means that basically both sides have agreed in principle to this bill. I handled one side of the debate, and the other guy, who was handling time in opposition, was a co-sponsor on the bill. So we didn't have any opposition at all. Basically what we did was pat each other on the back for what a bipartisan effort we had, and we passed that bill out of the House on a voice vote, and it's now in the Senate. And I have been told by both of our senators that they will do everything they can to shepherd that through the Senate as quickly as possible so we can deliver $240 million worth of relief to the farmers in Arkansas. So we're pleased about that and the bipartisan effort that came as a result of that. Now that came in the midst of all this Farm Bill debate. And that's really what y'all are concerned about. And I'm going to tell you kind of what happened with the Farm Bill. First off, I'm going to tell you the Senate version of the Farm Bill, the nice way of putting it is it missed the mark from our standpoint. And so the good news is our senators didn't vote for it, neither one of them. The bad news is it passed anyway. So we marked up a bill in the House that we feel is a much better reflection, certainly of Mid-South agriculture. Now there's a reason why that's a better reflection of Mid-South agriculture. Many of you know, and some of you were in attendance, at a Farm Bill field hearing that was held on the campus of Arkansas State University. Again, thank you, Dr. Welch, for hosting that. One of 4 in the country. And because there was only 4 of the Farm Bill field hearings, this kind of took on sort of a super regional dynamic. So I tried to impress upon the Ag Committee Chairman, Frank Lucas, the need to have all 10 of those witnesses be Arkansas producers. I was only able to prevail. We got 5 out of the 10, which is pretty darn good. And I'm going to tell you that those 5 producers did a stellar job in advocating for Arkansas agriculture, and the panel at large, Mid-South and Southern producers, really illustrated the point of why the Midwestern crop insurance model does not work for us in Mid-South and Southern agriculture. And that's why the chairman's mark reflected the needs of a more diverse production base and why it was so important to support that House bill. In fact, most of the agricultural commodity groups, including USA Rice and National Cotton Council, supported the House bill. Now, it was a very bipartisan effort in the House. It passed out of the House on a 35-11 vote. Initially, we thought we could get this on a voice vote. We had one member ask for a roll call, and that really illustrated the bipartisanship even more because we only had 11 dissenting votes. Some thought it spent too much, others thought it didn't spend enough. But by and large, 35 out of 46 is pretty doggone good effort in this environment in Washington. So we left there that night feeling pretty strong that we would move this bill onto the floor. We find out in a few days after that leadership on both sides doesn't want to deal with the Farm Bill. One side says it spends too much. We don't want to do that. The other side says it doesn't spend enough. We want to spend more. And again, I think we really hit the sweet spot. And where we find most of the resistance is in the nutrition title. And I want to tell you about the nutrition title just briefly, but keep in mind that essentially 80% of the total appropriation for the Farm Bill, as it's called, is nutrition. The commodity title took about a 38% cut. We did a budget reconciliation in the Ag Committee to look at a 4% cut in the nutrition title. What we arrived at in the chairman's mark reflects about a 2% cut in nutrition programs. Now, I want to say 2 things. First off, we did that by and large by closing loopholes that have been exploited that increase the cost to deliver these programs. But let me first say this, that Arkansas does a fantastic job in administering those federal programs. So Arkansas was really not affected at all. Where we were looking at areas being affected are the large urban centers north and east of us and some other parts of the country where you see this kind of problem taking place. But in spite of that, I think it's important to know that over the last 10 years, there's been an increase of 247% in food stamp beneficiaries. 247%. We had to do something to address this unsustainable pace that we were on. in funding nutrition. The initial number was 4%. We pared that back to 2%, reflecting about a $16.5 billion cut over a 10-year period. In doing that, we were able to gain a remarkable bipartisan support because everybody, with very few exceptions, recognized that was a responsible approach. But that was where our sticking point was. We had some that said we weren't cutting enough, others that said we weren't spending enough, and we're at an impasse. So it hasn't come to the House floor yet. We've got two things kind of working for us. The drought is not a good thing, but from a political standpoint, as it applies to the Farm Bill, it will have a lot to do with how this Farm Bill is received when we go back in session in September. Because if these other members are anything like me, they've been burning up the road and going around talking to farmers. And they're probably hearing the same thing that I'm hearing from farmers across the 1st District of Arkansas, and that is we need a Farm Bill, we need it now. And so I suspect that under the pressure of their farmers back home, when they come back in September, they'll feel a little more compelled to entertain the notion of a Farm Bill. Time is of the essence. As you know, this law expires on September 30th. The other option, barring the softening of people's positions, which I would rather see happen, the other option is a rules procedure that is called a discharge petition. What that means is basically we can go around and sign a petition and bring this bill to the floor regardless of what leadership thinks. If we get enough signatures on the bill, leadership would then be forced to bring the bill to the floor. Now, our leadership, Speaker Boehner, is committed to the rules, and he's committed to an open procedure, an open policy, and we bring bills to the floor under an open rule. So very transparent, and he is very committed to respecting the will of the House. Now, he may not like it, because he may not be crazy about the idea of a Farm Bill, but what he does like and what he does respect is the rules, and he respects that the House will work its way. So we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 signatures on that discharge petition. It will ripen probably around the first week in September, and we will be able to work it a little further, and I think we can get 218 signatures and force that bill to the floor. That said, we still have to deal with how do we get the Farm Bill in time for September 30th? And the answer is probably we don't. We'll probably have to do an extension of some kind. If we can pass the Farm Bill, then an extension is okay and it's relevant and we can work with that. If we don't pass the Farm Bill, we still have to do an extension. Now, why I prefer the Farm Bill versus the extension is for two reasons. One, the direct payment will still likely be stripped back or scaled back to some degree, even in an extension. So it's not a full extension of the current law, number one. Number two, if we do a one-year extension, we kick this Farm Bill down to the next Congress. We don't know what it's going to look like. It could look a heck of a lot worse than this one. And number three, it messes up the baseline for the next Farm Bill. So I want you all to be very clear and understanding, yes, we're going to have to probably put some sort of extension in place, even if we pass the bill before September 30th. But a one-year extension is not favorable to the current bill. And as far as conferencing in time, most of it's been pre-conferenced anyway, with very little exceptions. So our Senate staff, our House staff has already been working diligently to make sure that we keep that timeline as tight as possible so that if and when it does pass the House, it'll be largely a ceremonial conferencing. The members of the conference will be seated, they'd review the conference report, and they'd say yes or no and send it back to their respective chambers. So time the clock is ticking, no question about it. But I'm going to be an optimist about it and say one of those two scenarios will play out, and hopefully we can deliver a Farm Bill for you. But the House version is much more reflective, leaving producers with a price loss coverage option that functions in place of direct payment. You can opt into that, or you can opt into crop insurance. And we can give you a lot more details. I want to tell you that my staff is here. I want to encourage you to get a card from one of my staff members. Jay Sherrod, who handles ag issues here in the district, is with us. Andrea Allen, who is our district director, in the back. Doug Smith, who's one of our field reps. And I also want to encourage you to stop off and say hello to Ron Chastain with Senator Bozeman's office, who is here today, along with Nathan Davis. And we're all working together on this Farm Bill in the Senate and the House. Arkansas is working as a team. Appreciate the opportunity to come and bring you up to speed. Thank you all so much for your support.
Thank you very much, Congressman Crawford, and we appreciate your service on the House Ag Committee and your hard work on this Farm Bill. Doing the best you can, and that's all we can ask. Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to ask Bill Barnhill if he would bless the food. Bill?